to begin by saying it's February 19, 2019, and we're in Nagasaki, Japan. And if you could introduce yourself, say your name and spell it. Just tell me your name.
My name is Yoshiro Yamawaki. Yoshiro Yamawaki.
Great. Okay, well, thank you. Please, you are a survivor of the Nagasaki atomic bomb. How old were you at the time? Tell us your story.
被爆した時何歳でしたかって、被爆の体験をお話しいただけますか。
I was 11 years old. I was in the second grade of elementary school. Japan started the Pacific War when a newspaper and radio reported that Japan drew battle line with the United States or Britain. Many Japanese believed Japan would carry out a victory. It is because we were instilled with the idea that Japan is a land of God from the time we were young then. However, as the war was prolonged, the defeat of Japan became clear. The war was still going on when I entered the sixth grade, and it was during summer vacation of that year that the atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. I was exposed to the atomic bombing while at home, some 2.2 kilometers from the site of the explosion. At present, I am 85 years old, the same age as the current emperor of Japan. To be precise, the emperor's birthday is December 29, 1933, and I was born 6 days after. Please remember my talk if there is an opportunity for you to catch a sight of the Japanese emperor or on television or in a newspaper. Let me first tell you about my family back then. My father, who was 47 years old, worked as an engineer for the Mitsubishi Electric Corporation. My mother was 37 years old, and there were 7 children, including myself. My older brother was 14 years old and a third-year junior high school student. My twin brother and I were 11 years old and 6th grade at elementary school. I had 2 younger sisters and 2 younger brothers as well, making for a total of 9 people in a family. However, in my family, only my father and we 3 older brothers suffered the damage of the atomic bomb. Actually, U.S. Air Force's Lockheed fighter and Grumman fighter attacked Nagasaki 3 times, 2 weeks before the atomic bombing. On the last day of this attack, August 1, the bomb of 1 shot was dropped on Inasa International Cemetery, which was near my house. With the blast, the big gravestone broke through the roof of my house and fell inside. My mother was shocked by this incident. She took my young brother and sister and went to her mother's home in Saga the day before the atomic bombing. Therefore, that the damage of the atomic bomb was suffered only by my father and we 3 brothers. Let me explain about the copies you have been given. This is a map of the atomic bombing hypocenter area at that time. The red line shows the route that my brother and I took immediately after the bombing. When we went from our house, which is marked with X, to the place where our father's factory was located, we went there because my father had not returned home. Please look at this photograph. This boy was exposed to the atomic bombing at the point on the map where the blue mark is. He had been riding his bicycle, which delivering made for the post office. At the moment of the explosion, the skin melted from his back, leaving it look like a crushed tomato. He was thrown through the air with his bicycle and lost consciousness. His name is Mr. Taniguchi. You can see that my house was just outside the 2-kilometer radius in which this boy was. The only reason I didn't suffer the same horrible wounds as he did was that I had gone to the back to my part of my house 4 or 5 minutes before the bomb exploded. I will talk more about this later. On the morning of the atomic bombing, my father and 3 of us boys woke up at our home. My mother had taken our 4 younger brothers and sisters and evacuated to the family home in the countryside. After getting breakfast, our father went off to work as usual. My older brother, the junior high school student, went off to the weapons factory, where he was helping out as part of the mobilized student forces. The 2 of us twins stayed at home because it was summer vacation, and until just before 11 o'clock, we were out on the veranda. When we got hungry, we went in the sitting room in the back of my house. And while we were sitting room around the table, a whitish blue light shot across the room. Then came a roar that seemed to shake the whole house. The 2 of us got down on the tatami mat and covered our eyes, ears, and noses with our fingers, just like we had been taught to do. While we were in that position, plaster from the walls and other debris came falling down on top of us. I thought that a bomb had directly hit our property and that we would probably be buried alive there. The falling debris didn't continue falling for all that long, however. After a few minutes, the falling debris became more infrequent, and while lying there, the voices of people in the neighborhood screaming and crying reached my ears. While remaining down on the ground, I lifted my head up and looked around to find everything completely changed. Almost all the furniture had been mangled and tossed around. The walls had come crumbling down, and in every room, tatami mat floors were covered with dirt and debris. with furniture scattered all about. The roof had been blown off as well, and we could see the sky. The pillars and walls were embedded with large numbers of sharp-edged fragments of broken glass. The other houses in the neighborhood were in the same state of destruction. Across the harbor, the central part of the city was covered in the clouds of dust. The two of us evacuated to the bomb shelter in our yard, where we waited for our father and older brother to come home. About an hour had passed when our brother arrived home from his factory. At that time he said that it was too dangerous to stay in that tiny bomb shelter, and that we should move to Rajawan nearby. That bomb shelter, which was like the tunnel carved into the cliffside, was filled with mothers and their children. The children who had been showered in the heat rays while outside had suffered burn to any exposed skin. Other children were crying because their bodies had been stabbed by shards of glass and other fragments that had been thrown by the blast. If my twin brother and I had left the veranda to go to the sitting room 5 minutes later, we most likely would have suffered horrible wounds from the heat rays and blast. We spent that entire night worrying anxiously for our father to come back. By the next morning, however, he still hadn't returned. At that point, the three of us brothers headed off to find him. Please look at this. Please look at the map you have given. By looking at the red line, you can see that we walked from a point about 2 kilometers from the hypocenter to a place only 500 meters away from it. Of course, we didn't have any idea that the bomb dropped had been an atomic bomb, nor that my father's factory was so close to the site where it had been exploded. As we continued on, the damage grew worse and worse. The houses at the roadside had all burned to the ground, and trees and electric poles were scorched, although they remained standing. The factories on the other side of the river now look like masses of crushed wire, with only the largest of their columns remaining standing. There are many dead bodies among the debris lining the roads. The faces, arms, and legs had swollen up, making them look like black rubber dolls. When our shoes touched these bodies, the skin would come peeling off just like that of an overripe peach, exposing the white fat underneath. There were many dead bodies floating in the river as well. We were drawn to one that belonged to a young woman of about 18 or 19, from which a white cross belt was dragging behind. Looking closer, we saw that This white belt was really her intestines, which were protruding from the side of her abdomen. Feeling nauseous, we turned our eyes away and hurried off again in the direction of our father's factory. When we had come within about 100 meters of our father's factory, my brother suddenly screamed out and stood paralyzed with fear. I looked over his shoulder to see a boy of 6 or 7 who had died with something white hanging out of his mouth. At first glance, it seemed to me that he had been vomiting up noodles when he died. Looking closer, however, I realized that the round worms that had been living inside his body and come shooting out at once. We ran away, fighting back our nauseas. Our father's factory had also been reduced to nothing but scorched metal framing. Through the demolished walls, we caught a glimpse of the factory and saw 3 men working with shovels. Overjoyed, we called out, "Our name is Yamawaki. Where is our father?" One of the men glanced over and said, "Your father is over there." He pointed in the direction of the demolished office building. The 3 of us dashed off in the direction he had pointed to. What we saw there, however, was our father's corpse, swollen and scorched just like all the others. As we stood there stunned, the man with the shovel said to us, "If you want to take your father back home with you, you'd better cremate him here. If you don't want to do that, the only other thing to do is bury him here. What are you going to do?" The crematories had also been destroyed in the bombing and couldn't be used. With nothing else to do, we went around the scorched ruins of the factory and gathered up the smoldering pieces of wood so we could perform the cremation right there. We put our father's body on top of a bed burned post and then piled up the pieces of wood on top of him. When we lit it on fire, the flames rose high in the air. We put our hands together and said prayers for him. When we looked up again after finishing our prayers, we saw both of our father's feet sticking out from the fire. That was an absolutely unbearable thing to see. Our feelings must have showed because the man from the factory said, "You'd better go home for today. You can come back tomorrow and collect the remains." The next morning, we looked around the kitchen area of our demolished house to put out our father's remains in. We found one, and the 3 of us took it along with us as we went to collect our father's remains. It was very strange, but we weren't scared at all by any of the corpses we saw. We only thought of them as objects that blocked our way as we walked. When we arrived at the place where we had cremated our father's body, however, a shock greeted us. The body still remained as it had been the day before, in a half-cremated state and covered over with ash. There weren't any people from the company around. We three brothers only wanted to collect our father's cremated bones, but his half-cremated body was lying exposed. The only part of his body that had been cremated were the tips of his hands and feet and part of his stomach. We could only pick out a few of his bones. This body, which was like a skeleton covered in ash, was far more gruesome than the corpse of someone just deceased. It was even more unpleasant when we thought about how this body belonged to the same father we had always talked to and eaten meals with. It got so that I couldn't bear to look at our father's body anymore, and I said to my brother, "Let's go home now and leave this body here." Thinking back on that, I know that it was not a good thing to do. My brother looked at our father's body for a while longer, and then said, "We can't do anything more. We'll just take his skull home, and that will be the end." When the tongs my brother had brought touched our father's skull, however, it crumbled apart like a plaster model, and half-burned brain came flowing out. Letting out a scream, my brother threw down the tongs and darted away. The other two of us ran after him. There were circumstances under which we were forsook our father's body. I think that all people who lost family members and others close to them in the atomic bombing went through experience similar to this. There were 70,000 people who were killed in an instant by a single atomic bomb. My mother, who had gone out to the country with the youngest children on the day of the atomic bombing, passed away 13 years ago at the age of 97. I never ever told her the detail of what happened when we went to retrieve our father's remains, including how the brains had run out from his half-cremated skull, and how we had then run away home. Actually, another reason we didn't tell her was that she was in fact my stepmother, who had taken care of us since our dear mother passed away when we were 2 years old. After our father died, my twin brother and I began working. We were 15 years old then, and we worked for the next 45 years until we were 60. While working, we went to night school to complete our high school education. When I was 35, I began to have liver and kidney troubles. Because of this, I have been admitted to Nagasaki atomic bombing hospital 15 times. I was given interferon and other treatment, which I am still receiving. Unfortunately, in 2008 September, my doctor informed me that I had stomach cancer, and in October I underwent surgery at Nagasaki University Hospital, and in 2010 January I had surgery yet again. I should add that my older brother and my twin brother are also victims of cancer. One university professor has written that the atomic bomb killed people 3 times over. I think those words truly represent the horrific nature of the 3 destructive forces of the atomic bomb: its heat rays, its explosion blast, and its radiation rays. I pray that no one else will ever experience the brutal tragedy that I witnessed at the age of 11. However, it is said that there were some 14,450 nuclear warheads in existence, all of which are far more powerful than the atomic bombs used on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. There are still many people in the world who do not know how fearful and cruel nuclear weapons are. In addition to this, the world has become increasingly tense in the wake of 9/11, and there are still civil wars and international conflicts being fought. Not to change the subject, when I looked back to the Japanese history, it's very regrettable. In Japan, had a chance to avoid the atomic bomb. Please look at the following chronology. Allies has recommended the Potsdam Declaration against Japan on January 26, 1945. However, the cabinet was a statement to silence it. This gave the best chance of the atomic bombing in the United States. If the Suzuki cabinet accepts this, 200,000 people were not killed in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Undoubtedly, nuclear weapons lead to the disaster. Please lend us your strength to eliminate nuclear weapons from the face of the earth and make sure that Nagasaki is the last place on the earth to suffer an atomic bombing. Look at all work together to build a peaceful world free of war. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Wow, it's quite a story, quite an experience. I can't imagine being 11 years old and having to search the remains of my father and finding, going 2 kilometers and finding the ruins and finding his corpse, and amazing. But you have many nightmares about that. It's
11歳の時にですね、すごい凄惨な体験をされましたね。特にそのお父様の亡骸とかをですね、拾いに行ったりとか、そういう体験をされました。
So, did your sisters survive? They were in the countryside. So of your family, you lost your father, is that all? Everyone else survived?
お父様以外の家族ですね、兄弟、ご兄弟は生き残ったんですかね。
被爆したのは父と兄弟3人だけですね。私たち兄弟3人だけですね。だから後の妹、弟、母は佐賀の方に疎開してたので被爆してないんですね。
My mother and my younger sister and my younger brother, they were in the Saga prefecture, so they were not exposed to the atomic bomb. And only my brother and my father were exposed to the atomic bomb.
Is there anything else that you want to add? This was an excellent presentation. We're very grateful that you could come today and share this with us. And we will, put it on the internet for everyone to see.
今日は素晴らしいプレゼンを発表いただきましてありがとうございます。で財団の方のホームページでですね、今日発表していただいたインタビューをですね、掲載させていただきます。で他に何か付け加えたいこととかありますか？
質問したいことがあるんですけどね。
I have one question I like to ask.
なんでマンハッタンプロジェクトのね、フィロソフィーとかあるいはヒストリーを残していかなければならないのかね。それがよく私には分かりません。
So I do not understand why you need to carry and preserve the history and the legacy of the Manhattan Project.
Well, if we don't talk about the atomic bomb, if we don't teach the next generation of how it was that it came into being and how it was used and what its effects were, it's very common science now. There are many nations that have already figured it out then. And who know now how to do this. If we pretend it didn't happen, or nobody teaches the next generation of what happened and how dangerous and horrific and what a threat these weapons are to civilization, someone could use it again. Right? Isn't it important?
やはりそのマンハッタン計画の起源からその影響ですね、そういったものを次の世代に教えないとですね、また核兵器が使用されてしまうという危険性があります。今ではその核兵器というのはですね、他のアメリカ以外の国も持っているものでありますから、やはりまた使用されるという危険性がある中で、それを次世代に伝えていくっていう、この歴史を伝えていくということが大切だと思います。
もう一つあるんですけどね。
I have another question.
当時ですね、太平洋の司令官だったマッカーサーとか欧州司令官だったアイゼンハワーも原爆の日本に対する投下には反対したと聞いてるんですね。でそれにもかかわらずあえて原爆を投下された理由をね、どういうふうに考えてらっしゃるか。
I would like to ask your perspective on the use of nuclear weapons, as during that time, in the U.S. military, the GHQ Representative MacArthur and Eisenhower were against using the nuclear weapons against Japan, but as a result, it was used. So I would like to ask, why do you think it was used, the atomic bomb?
People debate why was it used. They've been debating this. There are historians in the United States who think it should never have been used. They ask the same question. And there are other historians that say that was inevitable. Once the military, the US Army, had control of such a weapon, they're going to use it. Anyway, there are arguments on both sides of the issue. I think no one will ever be satisfied. No side will ever be satisfied. It will be debated long after we're gone. Should they, shouldn't they have? The fact is they did. And we have to live with it. And we have to make sure it doesn't happen again.
この議論というのはですね、もうずっと長きにわたり行われているものであって、これの結論というのはですね、誰もが満足いく結論というのは至らないと思います。私たちの生きている間にもその結論というのは出ないものであって、歴史家の中では使われるべきではなかったというのと、軍がそういった強力な兵器を得たからには使わないわけがなかったというようなですね、そういった相反する議論がずっと行われていたんですけれども、結果的には使用されて、それを受け入れざるを得ないところだと思います。
I see. Thank you.
あとはないですか？ I think that's all.
That's good.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much.